If hopefully you can see my screen, that is our website, evidencemanagement.com. Feel free to check us out. We try to put resources on there that will be beneficial or useful to you. There's even a little self-audit tool that you can access through our website that will give you a quick health check on your agency's evidence operations. So avail yourself of that. Take advantage of the resources that we put out there. Hopefully, you'll find some utility in it. If not, let us know. We would love to improve what we do. I'd also like to point out the Facebook Evidence Management Community Forum on Facebook. Uh, the goal of this place, it started back in the pandemic. If you remember that, that was a time when we didn't go outside very much and we didn't get to connect with people. So we tried to do a little something online, and it's still a great resource to ask questions. Hopefully you can find some answers. I know that James spends more time on there than I do. I use Facebook Marketplace. That's amazing. But yeah, the community forum is a great place to get connected and get answers to questions. It is a good resource for you. I would encourage you to check it out and join. We've got folks moderating it. The intention there is that it is a closed group for evidence custodians. So we do try to vet people and make sure that they're actually working in the industry or have some tie, some connection to the industry, so that you don't feel like you're airing your dirty laundry in public. So I encourage you to check that out. I'd also like to say thank you to Tracker Products. They've been keeping the lights on for us. This is made possible through our partnership with them. I would encourage you to look up their software and their services at trackerproducts.com. We do that every week. But now, on with the show. As I mentioned before, at the top of the hour, we're going to stage an intervention today. We're going to have an intervention for good intentions. There are three things that I see as I go around the country, as we train, as we do consulting work, as we do the stuff that pays the bills, that we see over and over and over again. And I'm convinced that these are three things that start out because of our very good intentions. And we're going to talk about three things that are present in many places across the country that probably need to change. They can be very critical issues, important issues, things that we don't think about necessarily, things that we don't necessarily, they're not things that keep us up at night, like losing evidence or having evidence, you know, disappear on us. I guess that would be the same thing as losing it. But there are critical issues that we probably need to think more about. So there will be a disclaimer. We're going to use several different literary devices today. Some might be unsuitable for some viewers. We're going to use a lot of alliteration and consonants, maybe even some assonance. So if you have an aversion to those literary devices, please use discretion when viewing. So we're going to talk about a few things today. We're going to talk about some training events. We're getting started next week in Houston, Texas. I guess I've just buried the lead there. We'll also talk about some of our 20 and 22 events. Then we'll get to the main topic here, which is our intervention for good intentions. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do next time on the evidence show. So without any further ado, we're just going to hit the ground running. If you do have questions, feel free to type them into the question window. If you've got significant consternation about anything that we discuss or a disagreement, that's fun. Let's have it out. Let's let this place be the marketplace of ideas. That's always good. So we're doing training a little bit differently this year, and I'm excited about it. We're partnering with different industry partners to sponsor 2-day evidence certification training. It's very similar. It's the training class that we've been doing for the last 3 years, with the exception of the pandemic. And we're also providing certification training or certification for that training, which used to be a different cost. It was about a $350, $400 cost to the agency or to the participant in the past. But we really felt strongly that we want to get this training out to people. And we know and we understand that Police departments, sheriff's offices, other law enforcement agencies either can't afford or don't allocate resources to training for evidence custodians. So rather than cry about it, let's figure out a different way to resource that training. Let's find a better way to solve the problems. We've got some training on the schedule, on the docket. We're going to be in Houston next week. We still have a couple of seats available for that Houston class. If you are in the Texas area or anywhere, I guess technically, where you could reach Houston from your area, um, check out our website. You can still sign up. There are just a few spots. We do cut the training off because we don't want it to be too full, because we like to have participation in our training. And if you're in a big room with a lot of people in there, there's very little interaction. So we try to we cap it, but there's still a couple of spots. We'll be in Folsom, California in July, and Paso Robles, California in July. And then we're going to be in Cincinnati and back in California in August. And then at the end of the fall, we're going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. A fun thing about it is it includes all the training, the materials, the certification. There's no cost to the agency or the participant. We just think this is a better model. We're going to try it this year, and if it fails, well, we should have done something else. We're also going to try to add a few classes. I've been working with the folks at the Missouri Association for Property Evidence, and we've been trying to figure out dates. Haven't really been able to get anything on the calendar, but I would love to schedule something in Missouri this year, or Kansas, either one of those. Oregon, been talking to some folks in Oregon and in Florida about training classes, just haven't been able to put anything together as far as a date or a location. I will use almost any excuse to get to either coast. So would love to be in Oregon, would love to be in Florida, and of course the Midwest, Missouri, Kansas. We would like to be out there as well, because we would like to do some more 20 and 22 dates. We would like to see if we can get interest in starting associations in Kansas, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. We've already identified folks that are interested in those places. So we would love to help get that kicked off. If you're somewhere else in the country without an evidence association for your state, we would love to help you get one started. We will we'll fund the filing with your state, and we will help you navigate through the process of becoming a 501c3 nonprofit entity. And then once we're launched, it is your association. We have there's no ties, there's no requirements to hang out with us or watch this show or anything like that. It's just so important that local representation, states have representation. So I'm on that soapbox all the time. In Texas, we are fortunate to have Tape It, and that is a state association that provides an irreplaceable resource. If you're in California or Florida or Illinois or Texas, Arizona, any state that has an association, Oregon, those areas are significantly further along or in better position for an evidence culture that works and is sustainable than in a state where there's no information or no resources. So would encourage you to reach out if you're interested and look into that. So a couple of questions. We do have an online training class. We're going to be rolling out. This is from a question. I didn't just come up with this, but the question came out, do we offer the training online? We do have a very condensed version of the training online. It's like 7 hours, and there's a little test, a comprehension test, I guess. We're going to redo that curriculum this fall and try to make that a little more robust and update it a little bit. As far as East Coast, we're not on the East Coast this year unless we do a Florida class. We're more than open to coming to the East Coast and doing training, but we really haven't had any traction on the East Coast or anybody kind of step up and say, hey, we want you to come out here. But we're certainly not opposed to it, especially in the summer. So let's go ahead and get started. I mentioned today's topic, we're going to have interventions for good intentions. I'm going to talk about 3 really good intentions that many evidence custodians share. And these are not bad things, these are great things. in many of the agencies that I have been to personally, or talked to people from, or trained people from, um, I see almost nothing but good intentions. People are really interested in doing the right thing. They work hard. They're trying to do more with less. And those are really good intentions. The three good intentions I'm talking about today, um, one is saving costs and spending less. When you don't have a large budget, it's a really smart idea to save costs where you can and spend less if you can afford to spend less, or if you can't afford to spend more. Those are really good intentions. Helping people is another great intention, and I am not advocating for not helping people or not saving costs or not spending less, but these great intentions can have unintended consequences. Uh, the third great intention is reduce, reuse, and recycle. I love to recycle. I'm a fanatic about recycling. I shouldn't probably use these, but I do. But I do recycle them. So those great intentions have unintended consequences, and we don't often think about the unintended consequences of our actions. Now, I can't play music because of like copyright laws, but if we had a soundtrack today, there would be two songs. One would be Highway to Hell by AC/DC, which is just a great song, but also Hope the High Road. And if you can put in the question window who does Hope the High Road, if you can name that person, then you get a special prize because you're really awesome at music. And that's a great, great song. We'll reveal that. Anyone? Bueller? Now, if I say it before anybody puts it out there, okay. It does make me slightly sad that no one knows who wrote and performs Hope the High Road. Oh, nope, so close. Susan Barclay was very, very close. We'll give you an honorable mention because it wasn't Drive By Truckers, but it was a guy that used to be in Drive By Truckers. Yeah, Susan won. All right, that's Jason Isbell. He's an amazing singer songwriter, and that was real tangent right there. So Susan, you get a prize. If you'll email me at Henderson or Sean, SHAWN at evidencemanagement.com, we'll send you a prize, and we'll actually really do it because that was a really good answer there. Good save. So we're going to stage three interventions today. All of them are in C major, keeping with the musical theme of Jason Isbell and AC/DC. But our three interventions are going to be in three different areas, three C's. Major issues in C: cold storage, corrections, and conversions. And I'm going to try to lay out my case for each of these and explain why we need to have an intervention in each of these areas, even though they are started by or fueled by great intentions. We're going to talk about the unintended consequences of those issues and why we need to change and what we can do differently as a result. So three interventions, all of them in C major: cold storage, corrections, and conversions. All of these issues, we're not talking about something that is empirically bad. We're talking about a competition between values. And these are actual ethical dilemmas. You know, if you got to choose between something that's clearly bad and something that is clearly good, it's pretty easy to make that choice. We wouldn't even need to have a discussion. But these issues, a lot of times we're talking about competing values. For cold storage, the two competing values are pretty much saving costs or spending less and the appropriate storage of evidence. Those are the choices we have to choose between those two values. And as an evidence custodian and as a proponent for best practices and standards related to evidence management, you can probably guess which side I lean on. I lean more towards value number two. Now, I do get that saving costs and spending less is important when we can do it, but we're going to talk specifically about cold storage and those two competing values and discuss that today as we go along. Now, with corrections, it's the same value. When we correct evidence for officers, or when we do evidence corrections, or when we do it on their behalf, our goal, the value, is to help people. But that competes against the exact same value in a slightly different way with slightly different or dramatically different long-term consequences and long-term ends. And when it comes to conversions, it's a great thing to reduce, reuse, and recycle. I've got a recycling bin full of plastic bottles and cardboard boxes from Amazon, but the values that that competes with when we talk about converting evidence to agency use or property to evidence use is manifold. There are many different values depending on the situation where that compete with the value of reduce, reuse, and recycle when it comes to evidence and property conversion to agency use. Some of them are ethical issues, some of them are disposition issues, but you can see we're in competition between two different values in each of these areas. So let's hit the first one first, if I can hit that. Cold storage. Now, I'm going to read you a bedtime story, even though it's noon, and if you're sleeping, you're probably in danger of discipline at your job. So don't fall asleep. I'm actually not going to read to you much, but it's from one of my favorite storybooks, the NIST Biological Evidence Preservation Handbook. If you are not extremely familiar with this document, it is something that should absolutely be a guide stone for you and your agency when it comes to dealing with biological evidence. NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, has developed this biological evidence handbook with evidence custodians, with evidence organizations like IAPE, with SANE nurses, with people that run labs. A lot of different stakeholders have come together to help develop this handbook specifically for us, and it is a great resource. Now, if you read that book, you're going to learn certain things. And if you hang around property rooms very often, you're going to learn other things. When I go to evidence rooms, especially if I'm doing consulting work, I find typically at about 95% of the places I go that 95% of the cold storage devices that I see in use across the country, big agencies, small agencies, everywhere in between, they're using consumer refrigerators from like Home Depot. They're using, if they're not using consumer refrigerators from Home Depot bought new, they're converting refrigerators that they seized 20 years ago uh, from uh, from a dope sale, and they're using that for their evidence now. So 95% of what we see, or what I see across the country as far as cold storage for biological evidence, are consumer refrigerators or converted consumer refrigerators. 5%. 5% of the refrigerators that I see are either scientific refrigerators, lab refrigerators, or specific evidence refrigerators. And it makes me so very happy to see those when I travel around the country and look at new things. Uh, and let me explain why. It's not just a shiny bell or whistle or the fact that the temperature is displayed on an evidence or scientific or lab refrigerator. It's actually the definition of cold storage that makes a difference. When we talk about something being refrigerated, we're not just talking about it's in the fridge. The same way that room temperature depends on the room. Right now in this room, our air conditioner is not working properly, so room temperature in here is about 80 degrees. You'll probably see little beads of sweat forming on my glistening, shiny, bald forehead soon because it's hot in here. So room temperature means something different. If you're in a shed in August in Houston, it's going to be about 105 degrees and about 99% humidity. Same place up in North Dakota in February, negative 10, negative 20. So room temperature, refrigerated means something entirely different. Refrigerated is temperature that's controlled between 2 degrees Celsius and 8 degrees Celsius, or for those of us in the United States, 36 degrees Fahrenheit and 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, there's something really important here to discuss. It's less than 25% humidity. And this is the big difference between cold storage designed for labs and evidence and cold storage designed for chicken and fruit. Chicken and fruit refrigerators don't control humidity levels. They just don't. That's not what they're intended to do. They're intended to cool it down to a range of temperatures, but not necessarily control the humidity. In fact, the little boxes, like the little meat and cheese and fruit boxes in a consumer refrigerator, the reason that they're there is to shield them a little bit from humidity and and the outside storage conditions of the refrigerator. So when we look at temperature between 2 and 8 degrees and humidity less than 25%, when I do consulting work or do inspection work, I bring with me two little refrigerator temperature environment meters. One of them measures temperature, and the other, well, it measures temperature and humidity. But I want you to look at the values on that Elitech sensor that was taken a couple of weeks ago on a refrigerator, and I'd let these things set for like 4 hours so they'd have time to acclimate and have time to adjust to the humidity levels from being placed outside the refrigerator to being inside. So 67% humidity, and the other was 58% humidity. They were at two different levels within the same refrigerator. Two different readings, the same temperature, but wildly different humidity levels and wildly above that 25% humidity level that we're looking for to store biological evidence. If you're using a consumer refrigerator, more than likely you are storing your biological evidence in a very cold sauna, an environment that has, sometimes between 40 and 70% humidity. That's why your boxes and packages are a little bit soggy, because they're a little bit soggy, because there's a lot of moisture in those environments. Now I want to do a little experiment. I think my refrigerator that holds beverages here in the office is a little bit better. So yeah, mine does a little bit better job, but I've cranked mine down. I don't know if you can read that or if it's backwards, but I've cranked mine down almost to freezing. So my humidity levels are a little better controlled. I've got 2.5%, 2.5 degrees Celsius and 40%, 38% humidity on that one. Let's see how it stacks up with this one. Yeah, that one's a little closer. That's negative 0.7 degrees Celsius and 35 degrees or 35% relative humidity. Now, the reason I did that is to show you a couple of things. One, that temperature and humidity levels fluctuate within the same refrigerator if you use a consumer refrigerator. Mine was taken from my kid's dorm when she moved out of a dorm. So that's 40% humidity. That's 15% more than we should store evidence at. And I will tell you, if you open the door of a refrigerator or a freezer, the humidity levels skyrocket until it comes back down and reacclimates. So cold storage, consumer cold storage is not great for biological evidence. It clearly does not fall within the tolerances of appropriate storage for biological evidence. So what conclusions can we draw about cold storage? And I don't want to just labor on one of these issues too long. Yeah, consumer refrigerators save you costs. It's probably a little bit cheaper to buy a junky refrigerator from Home Depot. It is going to save you money. Unfortunately, it is also potentially going to damage the evidence inside your vault or inside your refrigerator. You are knowing when we do this, when we make the choice between saving a little money and buying the right equipment, buying the right tools, we are knowingly and intentionally creating an environment, an inappropriate storage environment for biological evidence. We shouldn't do that. So we've got to err for the value of appropriate storage of biological evidence if we value what biological evidence is able to accomplish for us. But the real question is, what can I do? I mean, we have a junky old Norge refrigerator. How do we change that? Well, we've got to start making business cases. We've got to start establishing a business case for the right equipment that will do the right thing. And I would use information that you can find in that NIST Biological Evidence Handbook to start building a business case for starting to explore how to resource better storage equipment for your agency with respect to biological evidence. A real simple question to start with is, you think it's okay if we don't store our evidence the way it needs to be stored? If we store it in a way that can damage the evidence, or should we knowingly store it in a way that's going to impugn the integrity of that evidence or possibly degrade the value of that forensically? The answer is almost always no, and it always should be no. So that's our intervention for cold storage. We need to get away from consumer refrigerators. It's a bad idea, and it happens all over the place all the time. And we need to stop if we can possibly stop. So my second one, and this is a little bit of low hanging fruit here, corrections. I am convinced that, or not, I'm convinced, I see this across the country in many agencies that I visit or train. I see the same thing happening over and over and over again. We make corrections for our officers for a lot of different reasons. One, because most evidence custodians are generally and genuinely helpful people that want to help out. They don't want to have an officer come back and have to do something minor if they could just do it for them, do it on their behalf. And you'll see a few things up here on the screen. I guess your screen's probably a different location than mine, but you'll see a package that's not sealed correctly. You'll see a package that's sealed with tamper tape, which is not a great idea. And you'll see a package that's not sealed with almost enough tape to close the package. Common issues. You'll see another little knife or a tool sticking out of a paper bag. These are things that we see all the time. My favorite is that firearm right there, which is not stored visibly safe. It is zip tied to the box, but it's not zip tied to where you can see inside the see if there's one in the go hole, and the the hammer is all the way back. So let's say that's loaded. It doesn't have too far to go, or one drop before, if there is a live round in the go hole, that something comes out the other end of that box. And those are corrections that we would probably want to address. We can probably universally say that we would need to address those things. Here is the issue. Correcting officer submission errors can absolutely save you time. Does it save you more time to do it yourself instead of having an officer come in? Yes, it does save time. Is it a really nice thing to do? Yes, it is a really nice thing to do. I mean, I'm not going to argue with those 2 points. But what I will say is the biggest reason for changing or for correcting our corrections behaviors with respect to officer submissions is that it perpetuates a culture of doing things wrong. If someone fixes something for me and I never know that it's a problem, I never understand, it's never called to my attention that I do something wrong, I'm going to keep doing it wrong. That's just the way humanoids work. I'm not going to suddenly have this epiphany of correctness and start to change my ways if it's always being done for me in the background. So when we take in evidence and we correct it on behalf of the officer as an act of kindness or to save time or just not to have the conversation with them, all are legitimate. What we're actually doing is probably perpetuating a culture and an expectation where they're just going to keep doing it wrong. And it is a slippery slope. But here is the biggest reason why correcting officer submission errors is important as a cultural piece to change for us. Sometimes, depending on the type of error that we correct or the what we correct, we can actually create material falsifications in our chain of custody documentation. If we add information that was not present, not provided by the officer, provided after the fact, or we read through the notes of the case and we add information in, then we are injecting something that we would very likely need to be able to testify to directly into our documentation. If you don't have that information firsthand, you derive it secondhand, it is very difficult to know and to be able to testify that that is accurate. Moreover, it might not be accurate. We can't make those leaps of logic without direct information from the officer. They should be involved in the correction of that. They should be involved in putting that information there in the first place. So we don't want to set ourselves up for a lie of omission or an accidental or inadvertent falsification of information. If we put a time in a blank, or if we seal something for somebody on a date and time that didn't happen, that wasn't the time that the evidence was sealed, that's a material falsification of chain of custody data. If evidence gets turned in on Friday and it comes in unsealed and I see it on Monday and I seal it put my signature on it. I mean, yeah, that is the day that I sealed it, but that's not the date that it was sealed. That's not the person that sealed it. That's the information that we're implying with seals. So those are things to think about. Correcting our correction behaviors and intervention. So what are the values that we're in competition with? Being helpful and nice. But those values, being helpful and nice, is actually competing with being effective or having accuracy in our documentation. It's competing with the value of creating competent officers or having an expectation of competence from the officers that submit evidence. And sometimes it's in conflict with the value of telling the truth. And we want to be on the side of both of those. So what can you do? We can establish an expectation. One, in order for an officer to do the correct thing, we have to provide them a resource that defines and describes the right thing. That would be an evidence submission manual or a packaging manual. We can also provide them visual aids. We can teach them, we can coach them. Even though they might not seem to like it, it is helpful. And then we can hold them accountable for doing it right. Having them correct their own mistakes teaches them not to make those mistakes again. That's the way some of us learn, by making mistakes. If we're not aware of the mistakes, we're not going to learn. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to be helpful and nice. Be helpful, be nice. Do these things in a nice and helpful way, but also remember what's important here: effectiveness and accuracy and the integrity of our evidence and the integrity of our chain of custody documentation. That's what's at stake when we do something that's purely just nice and purely for our own convenience. So let's see if we have any got questions. Yes. Um, there is a tendency with corrections to be perceived as someone that, and I'm not going to use any of the negative terms. Everybody knows what the negative terms are now, but there is it does happen that if we expect officers to correct their mistakes, that we'll develop a reputation as someone that is unnecessarily critical about officers' performance. And that does happen. And a lot of that depends on how we approach them, how we carry ourselves, how we interact with people. Um, that can have a lot to offset some of those effects. If people understand that you are trying to help them preserve the integrity of evidence associated with their cases, that can offset some of that. But making that change, making that jump, and having them correct the evidence is something that I really feel like we've got to start doing better at if we ever have the expectation that they're going to learn. So that is something. I didn't get to read all of it because I'm old and I can't see. Absolutely. I think the best point there, Jake, yeah, you want to have this is a relationship business. These folks have to know, patrol officers have to know when they screw something up and you send them a reminder that this is a relationship. You're trying to help them. We're working with them. This is a team effort. Everyone wins when we protect and preserve the integrity of evidence. And that relationship is key and critical in order to continuing that process. And I'm reading a question here. I haven't just lost interest. I don't understand that, but I'll reach out to you. So let's move on to the third intervention. This one I think is more important than correcting corrections behaviors, and this one might step on some toes. Um, I want to encourage you to develop an aversion to conversion. What I mean by developing an aversion to conversion is we practice converting property or evidence to agency use at an alarming rate at many different agencies across the country. The agency I retired from, we had a lot of large screen TVs held over from the run and gun dope era, where we would seize drugs, we would seize money. And because large flat screen TVs were a thing of beauty and novelty, we would somehow, for some reason, seize the TV as well. I don't know how a TV has ever been used in the commission of a drug transaction. Maybe if they turned it upside down and were like cutting it up on the screen, but even that wouldn't be very effective because TVs are best held upright. But we had a lot of TVs. We would always convert those to agency use. That was just a culture and practice at our agency. Now, flat screen TVs have gone down in price, so we don't see that nearly as often. We don't see drug task force seizing big TVs the way we used to, which begs the question, if we don't see it now, why did we see it then? And I think we saw it then because it was a novelty, and if we seized it as a forfeiture, we could convert it to agency use. And that's a dangerous little slippery slope that we start going down when we start looking at seizures and taking stuff from people. I see a lot of different places converting tools. If we need wrenches to fix our shelving in the evidence room, well, let's just convert those to agency use. The worst, most egregious one is ammo. At our agency, we would convert ammo to agency use. And there are some very compelling reasons not to do that. I was talking with James the other day, and they had a use case at their agency. The reason they stopped converting ammo to agency use is because somebody they 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 converted a big pile of ammo, and one of them was a hand reload, and it was really a hot load, and it blew up a gun in somebody's hand. And that happens. That's not an urban myth. That happens. I've seen it happen on the range before, that a hot reload had just blown up the barrel of a gun, and it's not a good thing. And when you think about what officers, I mean, if we go to a restaurant that we have been to an alarm the night before or a week before, and we've seen the place is dirty at night, we're not going to go to that restaurant anymore. So why would we trust the ammo that comes in from anonymous sources and really want to put that inside the gun that we are about to shoot that may save us someday? Nobody would do that, but we do it all the time with ammo. So I'm going to kind of try to build a case for developing an aversion to conversion, because I think conversions can cause some dilemmas that we don't necessarily we don't need to get engaged with. Now, some truths. Converting property evidence for agency use appropriately, following the laws in your particular state and region, can save you a little bit of money. Converting property evidence for agency use can get you some really nice things out of the garbage. There are some nice tools and things that come into our possession in many different ways. So there's nice stuff there that's available. It can also reduce landfill waste. Rather than fill up a dumpster with tools and tire irons and floor jacks and the things that we tend to take, or officers tend to take, on property crimes that never get used for evidence and eventually get returned to an owner, and it just fills up the landfill. So those are some legitimate issues related to conversions that we'll acknowledge at the forefront. But I want you to think about the unintended consequences of conversions. Converting property or evidence to agency use can literally blow up in your face. I mean, specifically with ammo, but there are a lot of different things within the property room that we try to convert that we have no idea the safety of that particular item, or how it was used, how its previous owner treated it, and if it's coming into our hands, there are chances that that person wasn't the most conscientious person in the world. That's probably how we got it in the first place. But more importantly, and probably more significantly, is that converting property evidence to agency use can create some ethical issues related to the Fourth Amendment, Fourth and 14th if you're a state. But when we take things from somebody, it's our obligation to seize it according to the law, but it's really our ultimate obligation to get it back to its rightful owner. If we seize things specifically with the end goal in mind of, man, we could really use that, then that's where the ethical dilemma exists. And I do know that it has been part of the culture and practice of law enforcement to seize things that weren't necessarily directly related to criminal instruments or fruits of the crime, or even evidence that was directly related to the crime. So we really create some ethical dilemmas when we convert things to agency use. If we get a lot of value out of the evidence that we convert, how hard do we try to get it back to its known or original owner? Those are some issues that come up from time to time. Converting property evidence for agency use also wastes time and energy that you don't have. Typically, to do a conversion, it requires a memo to a chief executive. It best requires an impartial magistrate, a judge, to sign off onto it. So that's a memo, that's a court order. Depending on your jurisdiction, that could be a couple of weeks of time. And quite honestly, the value that we get out of converting property or evidence to agency use wastes time and energy that we need to be spending somewhere else. I would say that most of us, unless you're disposing of evidence at a 1-to-1 ratio, you probably need to spend more time on disposing of evidence and getting it out the door, completely out the door, than spinning our wheels and trying to devote energy to converting that stuff. Because here's the really tricky and evil thing about converted property evidence. When we convert property evidence to agency use, regardless of our best intentions, what we do is we turn disposed into, well, let's store it somewhere else, and then we'll give it back to them when they break it. I was not over property evidence at our agency when we started seizing large flat screen TVs on dope transactions. But I was there when those TVs started to break. And invariably, if something is converted to agency use, for some reason, rather than throwing it in the trash at the end of its useful life, they bring it back. And then they have some crazy expectation that we're going to know what to do with it. After we've removed all the labels, the serial numbers, we have no idea, no ability to trace. It comes back. It's like we put it out, it's in its grave, and that's what we want out of disposed evidence. When we convert evidence, it has a way of coming back to haunt us in many different ways. So I would love to see us develop a stronger aversion to conversions for those reasons, in those reasons, not alone, but specifically. It makes a lot of business sense not to do conversions if we can possibly avoid it. So our competing values here: saving money, reducing, reusing, and recycling, versus the ethical dilemmas that it can impose, disposition of evidence issues, time and energy that we waste or could spend elsewhere, and then safety. Converting ammo to agency use is a horrible practice. Even if ammo is short, but buying crappy ammo that might blow up in your hand is not a good idea. So what can I do? Well, you can be selective in those transactions when your agency decides that they need to convert property to agency use. Follow the law and be selective, and make a business case why sometimes going to the hardware store and spending $5 on a wrench is worth more than asking the chief for the wrench that's sitting in your evidence vault and then asking a judge for that same wrench. Sometimes it's just cheaper and more cost effective to buy those things directly with department funds. So, any questions, concerns, disagreements? I've been waiting for a large scale disagreement on the evidence show, and I was hoping maybe it would be today. But if you've got any questions or issues or concerns, go ahead and type those in the little question window, and would love to discuss that with you. But absent that, and there's still time, even after I click the little button away from the question window, I want to tell you about our next show and what to expect at our next evidence show episode. So, episode 4 of season 3, a different kind of agency spotlight. I'm not going to tell you why it's different or what's different about it, because you might not tune in. I mean, we gotta interest you somehow. Mystery is probably the best. Um, that'll be 2 p.m. on May the 12th, 2022, and James doesn't know it yet, but he's going to host it because I'll be in sunny Lubbock, Texas, home of Buddy Holly and Waylon Jennings and William Clark Green and lots of other musicians and Mac Davis. But other than that, not much. So Lloyd Maines, that's another great Texas musician. But since y'all aren't from Texas, just trust me, Lubbock's a pretty cool town. But I won't be there. So I don't see any questions rolling in. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. If you do have questions that you want to forward to us at a later time, and can you see the humidity level inside my glasses? That's ridiculous. So thanks for being here. If you have questions, concerns, give us a shout, send us an email, either myself or James. We will try to respond as we can.